There are moments in a life that don't announce themselves as endings. They arrive quietly, wearing ordinary clothes, sitting across the kitchen table, asking nothing unusual, and then they are simply gone, and everything that came after them is forever divided into before and after. Nora Callahan was 63 years old the morning she woke up and realized the silence in her house was no longer temporary. It had been 4 months since Edmund died. 4 months since the paramedics had walked through her front door and left without him. 4 months of mornings without coffee already made, without the low hum of the radio he always left on too early, without the particular creak of his chair in the study that she used to hear through the ceiling while she was still in bed. 4 months of a silence so complete it had begun to feel like its own presence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something hollow and permanent settling into every room. She had told herself she was managing. She had told herself that grief was something you simply moved through, one impossible morning at a time, and that eventually the world would rebalance itself and she would find her footing again. That was what people said. That was what every card and every casserole and every neighbor who lingered too long on her porch had gently implied. Time. Time was what she needed. Time was what would soften this. But time, it turned out, had not been merciful to Nora Callahan. Time had been catastrophic. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early November when the first letter arrived. She had assumed it was another sympathy card. She had stopped opening those weeks ago, stacking them on the hall table in a pile that grew and shifted whenever she walked past too quickly. But this envelope was different, stiff, official. It bore the emblem of a financial institution she did not recognize. She stood at the kitchen counter and read it 3 times. By the third reading, her hands had stopped shaking, not because she had calmed down, but because she had gone somewhere beyond shaking, beyond fear, into that cold, airless space where the mind simply refuses to accept what the eyes are clearly reading. The mortgage. Edmund had taken a second mortgage on their home, not recently, 7 years ago, and the payments, which she had never known existed, had not been made in 11 months. The institution was initiating foreclosure proceedings. Nora set the letter down on the counter and stood very still. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked somewhere down the road. The refrigerator hummed. The world continued its indifferent business while the floor of her life opened beneath her feet. In the weeks that followed, more letters came. A financial advisor Edmund had hired without her knowledge had been managing accounts she did not know existed, investments that had failed, a business loan taken against assets she believed were jointly held, a decade of quiet, private financial decisions made by a man she had slept beside for 40 years, decisions that had collapsed inward like a building whose foundations had been secretly hollowed out. She hired a lawyer, a small, careful woman named Iris, who spoke slowly and looked at Nora with a kind of professional compassion that somehow made everything worse. Iris explained the situation in the measured, careful language of someone delivering news they had delivered many times before. The house would have to go. There was not enough to cover what was owed. The equity was gone. The savings Edmund had always told her were steady and secure had been quietly drained and redirected over years. He had not lied to her in dramatic, theatrical ways. He had lied in the quieter, more devastating way that long marriages sometimes allow, through omission, through reassurance, through the comfortable assumption that she did not need to know the details, that he had it handled. He had not had it handled. He had left her with nothing. Or so she believed. She did not yet know about the box. She did not yet know about the house. She did not yet know about the rabbit. And she did not yet know, could not yet imagine, that the man she was learning to hate in those cold November weeks had also, in secret and in silence, been trying to repair the thing between them that had been quietly breaking for years. But that discovery was still ahead, still buried beneath the rubble of everything she was currently living through. In December, Nora Callahan moved out of the home she had lived in for 31 years. She did not leave with bitterness, exactly. She was too exhausted for bitterness by then. She left with boxes, mostly. Cardboard boxes filled with the random archaeology of a shared life. Books, photographs, kitchen things she had no particular attachment to, but could not bring herself to leave behind. A set of candle holders she and Edmund had bought in Portugal on a trip they had taken for their 20th anniversary, back when the marriage had still felt full and warm and certain. She left those candle holders in a box in the hallway for 3 days before finally deciding to take them. She moved into a small apartment on the second floor of a building 2 towns over. It smelled like someone else's cooking and had a window that faced a parking structure. Her daughter Vivian, who lived in Seattle with her husband and their 2 daughters, called every day for the first 2 weeks, and then every other day, and then twice a week, and then once. Nora did not blame her. Grief had a half-life in the people surrounding it. Only the person at the center never got to step back from the heat. Her son, Roland, lived 40 minutes away and visited twice in the first month. He was a decent man, Roland. A busy man. He brought flowers the first time and takeaway food the second time. And both times he sat in her apartment, looking at his phone more than he looked at her. And both times he left after 2 hours, saying he would come back soon. He did not come back soon. Nora unpacked her boxes slowly, over many weeks, as though the act of unpacking represented a kind of surrender she was not ready to make. As long as the boxes remained, she could tell herself she was still transitioning, still between one life and the next. The moment everything was put away, she would have to admit that the apartment with the parking structure view and someone else's cooking smell, was her life now. She did not want this to be her life. She thought about Edmund constantly, and with a complexity of feeling she had no name for. It was not grief, exactly, or not grief alone. It was grief tangled up with fury, and fury tangled up with love, and love tangled up with bewilderment, and bewilderment tangled up with a terrible, knowing guilt she could not entirely explain. Had she missed something? Had there been signs? Had she been so wrapped up in the comfortable numbness of a long marriage that she had stopped truly seeing the man beside her? They had drifted. That much she knew, had known for years. The way long marriages sometimes did, quietly and without drama, like 2 boats that had once been tethered together and had slowly, almost imperceptibly, floated apart until the rope between them was taut, and then invisible, and then simply gone. They had been kind to each other, mostly. They had not fought. They had shared dinners and television programs and grandchildren's, birthdays, and the occasional brief warmth of a quiet evening. But the deep, urgent intimacy of their early years had receded so gradually that neither of them had ever named the moment it left. She had missed him before he died, she realized. She had been missing him for years. And now she was furious at him, and grieving him, and lonely in a way that had nothing to do with being alone in a small apartment. It was mid-January when she finally began going through the last boxes, the ones she had avoided, the ones containing Edmund's things, because she had not been able to face them in December and had simply carried them with her, unopened, from the house to the apartment, where they sat against the wall of the bedroom like a quiet reproach. She started with the books. That was manageable. His books, many of them still with his handwriting in the margins, small notes to himself in pencil that she could barely read. She sat on the floor with them, reading the margin notes, and felt something break open in her chest that had been sealed for months. He had been a thoughtful reader, Edmund. He had always been a thoughtful person, in the ways that did not involve money or communication or letting her in. Then the folders. His professional files, mostly. Things Iris had already gone through, but copies remained. She sorted these carefully, methodically, putting them in neat piles she would eventually take to a recycling center. Then a stack of folders she had not seen before. Older looking, slightly warped at the corners. Stuffed inside a larger envelope at the very bottom of the third box. She almost set them aside. She was tired. It was after 9 in the evening. She had a cup of tea going cold on the knitstand. But something made her open the envelope. Inside were documents she did not recognize. Not financial records, not anything with institutional letterheads. More like personal paperwork. A property registration. A deed transfer, dated 11 years ago. A survey document. A handwritten list of what appeared to be renovation materials and approximate costs, with Edmund's handwriting throughout. She read the address at the top of the deed 3 times. A property. In Edmund's name alone. In a small town in rural Vermont she had never heard him mention. Transferred into his sole ownership 11 years prior. Her first thought, sitting on the floor of her small apartment in January, was the thought she had been quietly dreading without ever consciously articulating it. Another woman. Another life. A place he had kept for someone else. The coldness that moved through her then was unlike anything she had felt before. Not the sharp cold of shock. More like the deep, structural cold of a building in which all the heat has been slowly seeping out for a very long time, and it is only now, with the last warmth gone, that you understand how cold it has been all along. She put the documents back in the envelope. She turned off the light. She lay in the dark for a long time without sleeping, listening to a couple arguing in the apartment below her, their voices rising and falling through the thin floor, and she thought about 40 years. 40 years. Their first apartment, small and poorly heated, in a city that no longer existed the way she remembered it. Her first teaching job. Edmund's first real salary. Vivian's birth, which had been difficult and frightening, and which Edmund had witnessed with a fierce, wordless attention she had loved him deeply for, in that moment. Roland's birth, easier, quicker, Edmund more practiced by then, already beginning to become the quieter, more inward version of himself that she had slowly learned to live with. The house, the years in the house, the growing children, and then the absence of the growing children, and then the two of them, alone together, in a house that had once been full of noise and was now simply full of time. She did not sleep. In the morning, she made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the envelope. Then she called Iris. Iris took 2 days to look into it and called back on a Thursday afternoon. The property was legitimate. It had been purchased by Edmund 11 years ago. There were no liens on it. It was legally now part of his estate, which meant that because of the financial situation, it would need to be assessed and potentially liquidated, unless Nora chose to go there first. It was Iris who suggested it, gently, practically, in the tone she used when she was trying to be kind within the constraints of being a lawyer. "You might want to see it before anyone else does," she said, "in case there's anything of personal significance there." Nora sat with that phrase for a long time. Personal significance. A place Edmund had owned for 11 years and never mentioned. A property in a town she did not know. A house where, for all she knew, another version of her husband's life had been quietly unfolding. She did not want to go. She did not want to know. But she also understood that not knowing had already cost her everything. Not knowing had been the quiet architecture of her loss. And so she decided, at 63, in the middle of a Vermont winter, in the worst year of her life, that she was going to drive to a town she had never heard of and look at a house she had not known existed and find out, at last, what Edmund had been keeping from her. She left on a Saturday morning. The drive was 3 hours. She had not driven long distances alone in years. Edmund had always driven. Another small thing she had forgotten how much she relied on him for, revealed now by his absence like objects emerging from melting snow. She found she was not entirely comfortable on the highway, not in winter, not alone, but she kept going. There was nothing else to do. The town was called Ridgewell. She found it in the early afternoon, past two larger towns and down a series of increasingly quiet roads that wound through bare winter trees and the occasional farmhouse set back from the road. Ridgewell had a general store, a post office, a small diner whose neon sign was only half lit, and a gas station with one pump. It had the atmosphere of a place that did not particularly notice whether you arrived or left. The property was on a road called Hollow Creek Lane, a county road, really. Just a lane running alongside what had once been, she imagined, an actual creek, now reduced to a narrow frozen trickle beneath a skin of gray ice. She almost drove past it. The house sat back from the road behind a line of birch trees that were bare now, their white trunks luminous in the flat winter light. It was smaller than she had imagined. Not the grand hidden life she had been bracing herself for. It was a modest one-story structure with a small porch and a peaked roof. The exterior was unfinished in places, raw wood visible beneath where siding had been begun but not completed. The windows were intact. The porch had two steps, both solid, both clearly newly laid. She sat in the car for a long time, engine idling, looking at the house. Then she turned off the engine and got out. The cold was immediate and sharp and clean, the kind of cold that clarifies things. She could hear nothing, no traffic, no voices, only the distant sound of wind moving through the bare birch trees with a sound like breathing. The front door was locked, but Iris had included a key with the documents she had forwarded. Nora had the key in her coat pocket. She stood on the porch and held it in her hand for a moment, and then put it in the lock and turned it and pushed the door open. The inside was dim. She found a light switch near the door and flipped it. Nothing happened, of course. The utilities had not been active, presumably not for some time. She went back to the car and retrieved the small flashlight she kept in the glove compartment. A habit from before, when Edmund had always been the one who had habits like that. And then she went back inside. What the flashlight revealed stopped her. She had been expecting emptiness, or worse, evidence. Cosmetics on a bathroom shelf. A woman's clothes in a wardrobe. Something that would finally confirm the story she had been telling herself since January. But this was not that. This was something she had no immediate category for. The main room was partially furnished. A wooden shelf unit along one wall, clearly handmade, its joints precise and deliberate. She recognized Edmund's woodworking in the joinery. He had made things occasionally when they were younger, before the years had narrowed his time. A small table with two chairs, mismatched but considered, as if chosen carefully from different sources. A rug in the center of the floor, rolled and still in its wrapping, never unrolled. Curtains at the windows, still folded, still in paper packaging, leaning against the wall beneath the sills. A paint tin in the corner, its lid sealed, and beside it a folded sheet of paper that turned out, when she opened it, to be a paint color swatch with a color circled. Sage green, the color of the bedroom in their first apartment. The apartment they had lived in when they were first married. She stood in the room with the flashlight and felt something shift inside her. A small, reluctant shift. A question forming that was different from the one she had come here to answer. She moved deeper into the house. A kitchen, small with open shelving and a single window facing what would be, in summer, a back garden. The fittings were simple and clean. Someone had installed them carefully. A wood stove in the corner, not yet connected to the flue, but positioned and ready. A wooden rack on the wall for pots or utensils, handmade, in the same style as the shelves in the main room. A bathroom, basic, functional, with a small window, and then a short hall leading to 2 small rooms at the back of the house. She moved down the hall and pushed open the first door. It was in the middle of moving the flashlight across the second room that she froze. She had heard something, very faint, very small. A sound like something soft shifting, something alive and cautious. From behind the far wall of the room, where old boxes and folded fabric had been piled, she stood completely still. The sound came again, a tiny rustling, then silence. Her heart was moving strangely, something between fear and recognition. She crossed the room slowly and carefully moved one of the boxes aside, and then another, and the flashlight found it. Crouched in the corner, ears flat against its head, its small body coiled into itself with the particular stillness of an animal that has learned that staying very still is the safest response to any disturbance. A rabbit. A small, dusty white rabbit with gray around its nose and ears. Alive. Unmistakably, impossibly, still alive. She exhaled. The rabbit did not run. It watched her with dark, careful eyes. She had no idea how long it had been there. Weeks, maybe longer, surviving on whatever it had found. There was an overturned water dish, and the remnants of pellets scattered across the floor, as if a bag had been left and tipped over, enough to sustain a small creature for some time if it was careful. Someone had clearly been here, had left provisions, but not recently. She crouched down until she was at the animal's level. The rabbit watched her. One of its ears lifted slowly, cautiously, and then it was the rabbit that moved first. Slowly, with enormous deliberateness, it took 2 small steps toward her outstretched hand and touched its nose to her fingers. The lightest possible contact. A question asked in the language of small frightened things. She sat down on the cold floor of that unfinished room in rural Vermont, in a house she had not known existed, with a rabbit she could not explain, and she cried. She cried in a way she had not allowed herself to cry since Edmund died. The ugly, thorough kind of crying. The kind that empties you. She sat there for a long time, and the rabbit did not leave. It moved, eventually, to sit beside her knee as she felt its warmth through the fabric of her trousers, and the warmth of it was almost unbearable. When she finally stopped, she looked around the room again, and this time she noticed, behind where the rabbit had been crouching, something she had missed before. A wooden box, old-looking, dark with handling, its hinges slightly tarnished. Surrounded by what appeared to be loose photographs, face down, tied bundles. Small stacks of something she could not immediately identify in the dimness. She reached for the flashlight. She looked at the box for a long time before she touched it. Then she lifted the lid. The letters were on top, bundled in groups, each group tied with a different color of string. Some were in envelopes. Some were folded and loose. She picked up the first loose one and unfolded it carefully, her hands steadier than she expected. The handwriting was Edmund's. The letter was addressed to her. She read the first line once, then again, and a third time, and in the silence of that cold room, with the rabbit sitting warm and still beside her knee, the first stone of the wall she had built around herself in the last 4 months, shifted quietly and unmistakably from its place. The letter began with the words, "I do not know how to start this, because everything I have tried to say to you in person has come out wrong for years." She did not read all of it that day. She could not. She read perhaps half, sitting on the floor with the flashlight propped against the wall. And then she had to stop, not because she could not bear it, but because there was too much of it to process all at once. Feeling too much at the same time had the same effect as feeling nothing. It overwhelmed the system. It required processing in portions. She packed the box carefully and carried it to the car. She also, after considerable deliberation, put the rabbit in the cardboard box she had found in the kitchen, folded her coat around it for warmth, and placed it on the passenger seat. She drove back toward town. She ate a sandwich in the half-lit diner and sat there for an hour, looking out the window at the empty main street of Ridgewell, and thought about Edmund. She got a motel room on the edge of town, a plain room, a double bed, a bathroom, a television she did not turn on. She brought the box inside. She brought the rabbit inside, still in the cardboard box with her coat, and set it near the radiator. She sat on the bed. She opened the wooden box again. She read through the night. The letters were not all finished. Some were begun and abandoned, mid-sentence, replaced by another attempt. Some were very short, a paragraph or two, as though he had started and run out of courage. A few were long, several pages dense with Edmund's careful handwriting, and these were the ones that dismantled her most thoroughly. He had been writing them for years. That was the first thing that became clear. The dates on some of them went back 6, 7, 8 years. A sustained private effort to say the things he had never learned to say aloud. He wrote about the distance between them. He named it, clearly and without defensiveness, which surprised her. He did not blame her. He turned the examination mostly on himself, on his own emotional withdrawal, his difficulty with vulnerability, the patterns he had brought from his own family that he had never adequately confronted. He wrote about watching her from across rooms and wanting to cross the distance and not knowing how. He wrote about the way she laughed when she was genuinely surprised and how he had begun to feel, in later years, that he never surprised her anymore, and how much that saddened him. He wrote about the money. He wrote about this carefully and with evident shame. The investments had been an attempt to secure their retirement. The decisions had been poor. He had not told her because he had believed, with the particular delusion of men who confuse control with protection, that he could fix it before she needed to know. He had not fixed it. He had made it worse by trying to fix it quietly, and then worse still, and then it had grown beyond his ability to conceal or resolve. He knew what she would face when he was gone. He had known for years, and he had not found the words. But the house was different. He wrote about the house in a way that was different from everything else. He wrote about finding the property. He had seen it listed nearly 12 years ago, before things had gotten bad, when there had still been money enough to do something unexpected. He had thought about the two of them retiring somewhere smaller, quieter, somewhere they could start again without the accumulated weight of the house they had outgrown as a marriage. He had bought the property without telling her, intending to present it as a gift, as a plan, as an invitation. And then life had continued, and the money had become complicated, and the moment had never arrived, and the property had sat there, waiting. But he had not abandoned it. On every trip he claimed had been for work, over the space of years, some of them had been real, and some of them had not. The ones that had not been for work had been for this. He had driven to Ridgewell and worked on the house, alone. He had taught himself things from books and from the internet. The shelves, the kitchen fittings, the steps on the porch. He had learned to do things he had never done before, late in life, quietly, for her. Working on a house she did not know existed toward a day, he kept moving forward into an imagined future. He had planned to take her there on their 41st anniversary. He had planned to drive her there without explanation, to let her discover what he had made. He had planned to give her the letters, all of them, the whole box, everything he had not been able to say aloud for years, and he had planned to ask her if she would be willing to begin again. Not pretend the damage hadn't happened, not erase the years of silence and distance, but begin again, honestly, in a smaller and more truthful life, in a house the size of what they actually needed rather than what they had always thought they were supposed to want. He had died 11 months before their 41st anniversary. The rabbit she found toward the end of the letters, in a short note that was more tender than anything else in the box. He had written, "I remembered, the other day, something you told me before we were married. You told me you had always wanted a rabbit as a child, and your mother wouldn't allow it. You said it so simply, like it was just a fact, but I remember thinking you looked sad for a moment. Sad the way people look when they mention something they gave up so long ago, they've almost stopped knowing they gave it up. I have been looking into rabbits. I know how that sounds. I know you will laugh. But I thought, if we are going to start over somewhere small and quiet, we might as well start properly. With a rabbit, I found a breeder not far from Ridgewell. I thought about getting it early, having it there when I bring you. Something alive in the house, something soft, something yours that nobody asked about or approved or made a decision about. Just yours." He had gotten it early. He had put it in the house and trusted someone in town to check on it and fill its water and feed it until the day he planned to arrive with her. And then he had died, and no one had known to keep checking, and the person in town had stopped coming, and the rabbit had survived on what remained in the bag and on whatever else it found in that quiet, unfinished house, waiting in the dark. She set the letter down. She looked at the cardboard box near the radiator. The rabbit had its eyes half closed in the warmth, its nose moving in small, rhythmic pulses. She pressed her hands flat on the bed and breathed carefully. She thought about 41 years. She thought about all the rooms she and Edmund had moved through without truly entering them together. She thought about the distance that had settled between two people who had loved each other young and fiercely, and had then spent decades trying to hold that love in place with politeness and routine and the shared administration of a life. She thought about the man who had driven alone to a house in the woods and taught himself to lay floorboards and build shelves and hang curtains that were still in their packaging because he was saving them for the day she would be there to see them opened. She thought about all the things he had not said. And then she thought about the thing he had tried, in his clumsy and inadequate and devastatingly late way, to say. She did not forgive him that night. Forgiveness was not a single night's work, and she knew that. The financial ruin was real. The secrets were real. The years of a marriage conducted at a careful, painful distance were real. The fact that he had tried to repair things in silence, without her input or knowledge or choice, was itself another form of the same problem. He had decided again what she needed, without asking her. And yet, the house was real. The letters were real. The 41 years of a person who had loved her imperfectly, and wound himself in silence and still. Beneath all of it, beneath the failure and the fear, and the accumulated damage of a life lived not quite honestly enough, had been trying to find his way back to her. That was real too. The rabbit's nose twitched in the warmth of the radiator. In the morning, she called Iris and explained what she had found. The property, she told Iris, she intended to keep. She did not know yet exactly how, or on what terms, or what that would require, but she intended to keep it. She drove back to Ridgewell. She stood on the porch of the small house in the winter light for a long time before going inside. Then she went to the car and retrieved the cardboard box and brought the rabbit in. She set it down in the main room and opened the flaps and waited. The rabbit emerged slowly, one cautious paw at a time, and stood in the center of the rug that Edmund had never unrolled, its nose working furiously, taking in everything, claiming the space in the careful, deliberate way of small creatures who have learned that survival requires patience. Nora knelt on the cold floor and watched it. She stayed in Ridgewell that week. And the week after, she called her daughter and told her, very carefully, what she had found. Vivian cried on the phone for a long time, and Nora sat quietly and let her. Then she told her what she was planning. She did not know entirely what she was planning, but she told her that she was not going back to the apartment with the parking structure view. Not yet. She began learning the house the way you learn a person you have just met, starting with the practical and working toward the intimate. She made a list of what needed to be done and began making calls. She found a handyman in the next town, an older man named Grafton with a red truck and a quiet manner who looked at the house with professional respect and told her that whoever had done the preliminary work had done it carefully and well. "Good bones," he said, and she felt something strange and painful move through her at those words. She unrolled the rug. She opened the curtains, still in their packaging, and hung them at the windows. They were a warm cream color, heavier than she expected, and when they were up, they changed the quality of the light in the room entirely, made it softer, made the room feel inhabited in a way it had not before. She found the paint tin in the corner and opened it and looked at the color, and then she looked at the color swatch she had circled. And then she painted the kitchen walls in 3 careful coats of sage green on a Thursday afternoon, while the rabbit sat in a patch of pale winter sun on the unrolled rug and watched her. She continued reading the letters. Not all at once. A few at a time in the evenings beside the small lamp she had driven back to the apartment to retrieve along with several more boxes of her things. She read them in order as best she could determine, and she began to understand the chronology of Edmund's interior life in a way she had never understood it when he was beside her. He had been a lonely man. She had not known that. She had thought she was the lonely one, the one who waited for connection that did not come. She had not understood that he was also waiting, that the silence between them had been full of 2 people, each waiting for the other to cross a distance neither knew how to cross. 2 people who had loved each other and who had, over decades, developed a mutual but unspoken terror of the vulnerability that genuine closeness required. She put the letter down and looked at the sage green walls. She had loved him. She still loved him. Not the Edmund she had learned to live alongside in the comfortable, muted way of their later years, but the full Edmund, the complicated one, the one she was only now beginning to know, the one who had bought a piece of land and driven up alone in all kinds of weather to build something with his hands because he did not know how else to say what he meant. She was angry at him. She thought she probably always would be in some corner of herself for the secrets and the money and the years of a distance he had helped maintain. Forgiveness and anger, she was learning, did not cancel each other out. They simply had to coexist, like 2 climates in the same house, each real, each persistent, each requiring its own kind of acknowledgement. Spring came to Ridgewell slowly. The frozen trickle of the creek behind the house thawed and started moving. The birch trees at the front of the property came into pale, tentative leaf. The garden, which she had not thought about through the winter, turned out to contain, beneath the dead growth and the frost-hardened soil, what appeared to be the beginning of a deliberate planting. Raised beds framed in wood, stakes with faded markers, raspberry canes that she almost cut back before realizing what they were. Edmund had planted a garden. She stood among the waking raspberry canes in her mud-stained boots and felt the particular sensation of someone who has found a photograph from a party they were not present for, but somehow appear in the background of. Grafton came with 2 workers, and they finished the exterior siding. They connected the wood stove to the flue. They laid the bathroom floor properly and fixed the issue with the kitchen water pressure and built out the small porch to accommodate a second chair. 2 chairs. She had asked for 2 chairs, automatically, and only afterward understood why. Her daughter, Vivian, came in April with her husband and the grandchildren, who were 8 and 6, and who ran through the small house with the efficient and generous joy of children entering any new space. They found the rabbit immediately, of course, and chased it joyfully until Nora intervened on the rabbit's behalf. And after that, the rabbit seemed to regard the grandchildren with the resigned dignity of someone who has accepted that certain inconveniences come with the territory of being loved. Vivian stood in the kitchen with the sage green walls and looked at her mother for a long time. "I didn't know he had this in him," Vivian finally said. "Neither did I," Nora said. "Are you going to stay?" Nora looked out the kitchen window at the garden, where the raspberry canes were leafing out fully now, and the raised beds were ready for planting. "I think I might," she said. She was not the same woman who had stood on that porch in January with a flashlight and a dread so complete it had felt like weather. She was not healed. She was not fixed. She was not certain of anything, except perhaps that certainty was not the thing she had been missing. She had been missing something else, something more like honesty, the willingness to look at a complicated thing without demanding it simplify itself into something easier to hold. Edmund had loved her. Edmund had failed her. Edmund had been, in the end, someone who had tried, in the only way he knew how, to repair what he had damaged, and had run out of time before he could complete what he had started. That was his whole life, she thought, distilled into this house. A project of love and repair that was not quite finished. But she was here now. She was the one who would finish it. She planted the garden in May. Tomatoes, herbs, a row of lavender along the southern edge of the beds. She ordered a proper hutch for the rabbit, a large one with a run attached, positioned in the sheltered corner of the garden where the afternoon sun gathered. The rabbit, who she had eventually named Edmund because she could not bring herself not to, explored the run with the careful pleasure of someone discovering a space that had been prepared specifically for them. She called Roland in the summer. He drove up on a Saturday, and she made lunch, and they sat on the porch in the sun on the two chairs, and she told him everything. He was quiet for a long time afterward, and then he said something she had not expected. He said, "I always thought he was cold. I always thought he just wasn't a feeling person." And she said, "He was the most feeling person I ever knew. He just never learned how to open the door." Roland stayed for dinner. He came back the following month with his wife, and then again after that. In the box, near the very bottom, beneath all the letters and the photographs and the folded lists of materials and costs, she had found one more thing. A card. A small card, the kind you might put with a gift. It was sealed. Her name was on the front in Edmund's handwriting. She had not opened it in January. She had not been able to. She had carried it in the wooden box all through the winter and the spring and into the summer without opening it, not because she had forgotten it was there, but because she had understood, without being able to explain it, that it required a specific readiness, that it would wait until she was able to receive it. She opened it in August, on a warm evening on the porch, with the rabbit running loose in the garden, and the light turning golden in the might, birch trees and the smell of the garden coming up to her on the slight evening breeze. The card read, "I know I should have said this better. I know I should have said it sooner. I know there is no amount of sage green paint that repairs what silence costs. But I am trying to tell you, with all of this, that I see you. I have always seen you, even when I did not know how to say it, even when I made you feel invisible. You were never invisible to me. You were the thing I was always trying to walk toward." She held the card in her hands until the light had almost gone. The rabbit came and sat at her feet, its nose working in the warm evening air, its small warm body a presence she had come to rely on without entirely knowing when that had happened. She thought about Edmund building this porch by himself, in secret, with books and tutorials and the particular stubbornness of a man who had decided, too late but not too late, that love was something you could still build with your hands if you were willing to do the work. She thought about all the ways a person can love you and still fail you. She thought about all the ways love can persist underground, patient and persistent as a root system, moving toward the light through soil you cannot see. She thought about the woman she had been in January, shattered, furious, certain that what had been lost could never be recovered. And she looked at the garden and the house and the warm, improbable fact of the rabbit at her feet, and she understood that she had been wrong. Not about what had been lost. That was real. But about what remained. There was still something here. Imperfect, complicated, unfinished, but real, and hers. She stayed. She always would.